Welcome back to Great Day Live. In today's show, we're taking time to celebrate Black History Month with an entire show dedicated to Black history makers and successful Black business people here in Kentuckiana. Now, you probably recognize this guest from our Warren Wealth segments on Wednesdays. I'm so happy to welcome Marcus Warren to the show. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, first of all, Marcus, can you talk a bit about the lack of diversity in the financial services industry?
Sure. So, as far as minority or especially, Black representation in the financial services industry, right now, it's about 7%. And so when we talk about financial services, what exactly is the financial services industry? And we're talking about financial advisors who do things like mutual fund stocks, insurance agent, corporate bankers, things of that nature. And really, we're 17% of the population, but just 7% in the financial services field.
Wow. And what inspired you to follow this career path?
You know, I kind of stumbled into it, for a lack of better terms. When I went to college and what I studied at college was political science, public administration. I thought I was going to take the attorney route. And then I started working as a financial analyst at MCI WorldCom back in Dallas. And that kind of set me on my path towards the financial services sector. They moved me out to Kentucky. And from there, I got an opportunity to work at a bank out in Baltimore. And from that point on, so almost, I guess, a little over 20 years now, I've been in the industry, and it's proven to work out well. Just like I said, you don't see a lot of people who look like me in the industry, but it's really given me the opportunity to educate, to learn, and then educate others on the opportunities in the field.
Absolutely. And Marcus, what advice would you give to young Black children that are growing up in today's world?
Um, that's a broad question, but in regards to financial services, it boils down to, if you know better, then you can do better. Knowledge is power, and I really think you have to take the time to learn about things, to learn about the industry or whatever field you want to get into. Once you do that, I think that's step one, having that knowledge. The second step is to have a plan and you to not utilize that knowledge and act on it, because if you don't act on what you know, then it doesn't do any good. So those are the things that I would tell the youth, to gain the knowledge and then act on that knowledge.
That is such fantastic advice. Now, Marcus, let's talk about building net worth and the power that we hold with our dollars.
Yeah. So when we talk about the power that we hold, African Americans right now, as far as buying power, we have $1.3 trillion of buying power. And that's significant because there is money in the community that goes out. And so we are buying a lot of things. But conversely, buying power does not equal net worth. And that's where we see the biggest challenges, which is in Black wealth, which is basically, for as far as African Americans go, we have 10 cents to every dollar of wealth that our white counterparts have. And so there's opportunities to learn how to build wealth. And so what we've done as far as Warren Wealth Management, my firm, we have partnered with a nonprofit here in Louisville called the Financial Empowerment Academy. And so what we're trying to do is teach families, communities, individuals, students about net worth, about just small things like credit, checking accounts, savings accounts, home ownership, investing. There's so many things to learn, because once you know better, you can do better. And so one of our missions is to educate and teach here in Louisville.
That is fantastic. Marcus, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
To learn more about Warren Wealth, just call 502-339-8255 or go to warrenwealth.net. And you can get a copy of his best-selling book, The Retirement Playbook, when you schedule a consultation with Marcus.